Money talks. So what will the government's big spending plans this week tell us? Rachel Reeves' wallet has been wide open this week. Promises of long-term spending of tens and tens of billions of pounds. But where is the short-term pain to pay? The Cabinet Minister here to account for the government and himself will be talking to us about that. And he's no stranger to the odd bit of criticism in this studio, you might remember.
I don't know who the tech minister is. What's his name?
Peter Kyle.
Yeah, well, he's a bit of a moron, sorry.
I'm sure that Sir Elton was only
teasing. It didn't take you long before you were playing that.
The Tech Secretary Peter Kyle is here alongside Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary for the Conservatives. I do have to ask, I just wonder what went through your mind when you heard that.
I'm a profound dyslexic. The first person who called me a moron was a teacher in a classroom when I was a kid, when she was trying to ask me to read Shakespeare. So I've gone through my whole life being called these things and focusing on what my job is. Back then it was trying to learn how to learn. Now it's trying to deliver for creatives and AI sector and the future of our economy.
And we'll be talking about that later. Politics can be a rough business. So, Chris, I'm duty-bound to ask, what's the rudest thing that anybody's ever said about you as a politician?
That's not broadcastable.
Goodness me. I mean, I remember when I first ran for Parliament in Hampstead and Kilburn. In Kilburn, I was heckled very badly at a hustings back in 2010. But I can't remember the precise insult, but it was pretty bad. OK, well, thank you both for your good humour. We'll be talking to you both later in the programme. After the shenanigans of the past 24 hours, Reform Deputy Leader Richard Tice will be here too. And there's another megastar with a blunt message.
Whoa. Stop whining.
I sat down with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator, to find out why he's back. And our team at the desk today is the former Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, the journalist Coco Can, and historian Dan Snow. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, by what's making the news. And there's a real pick and mix in the headlines this morning. The Sunday Telegraph splashes on the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, saying bosses should be able to stop employees wearing the burqa at work. There are lots of different snippets about the spending review. The Sunday Times creates a magic money tree for Rachel Reeves. The Sunday People says the minister with us this morning, Peter Kyle, wants something like an app cap, limits for kids on access to social media. We'll talk about that later. The Independent publishes its Pride list today, featuring Victoria McLeod. You can see her on the top left there, the former judge suing the government over the Supreme Court ruling on the definition of a woman. And there's a full interview on yesterday's newscast with her that's worth a listen. And the BBC's leading this morning on the riots in LA. Donald Trump, the American president, has deployed 2,000 of the National Guard to deal with protests there. The unrest's been in a predominantly Latino district, and it was sparked by raids on undocumented migrants. So a big story unfolding there in the United States, but we'll concentrate on the United Kingdom this morning. A warm welcome to all three of you. A huge moment coming up for Rachel Reeves. Jeremy Hunt, you've been the Chancellor sitting in number 11 a few days before a big moment like this. What's it like?
Well, are we allowed to feel sympathy for our political opponents in British politics? Because I do feel somewhat for Rachel Reeves. This is a nightmare for chancellors because pressure is coming at you left, right and centre. I remember when I was Chancellor walking through Westminster Tube and I saw a huge ad put up on one of the walls and I realised there was only one person they wanted to see that ad. It was me. And this is what happens to chancellors. But I think when it comes to substance, the most interesting article is the editorial in the Sunday Times today, which says that without welfare reform, she will not get the sums to add up. And I am worried that Labour is backtracking on welfare reform. I really hope they don't.
Coco Can, Labour is, though, saying they'll slow down welfare spending from the projections that it was meant to go up by. Where do you see the priorities being this week?
Well, I think we can take this as a statement of intent. And I, can't speak for every Labour voter, but certainly I think a lot of us voted Labour because we wanted change. We don't want more austerity and we want the vulnerable protected. So I think if they don't backtrack on some of this, these proposed welfare reforms, then they might see that they're losing more of their votership.
Very difficult dilemmas all over the place because, public money is tight, even though it has been going up. And we think overall, Dan, that money will continue to go up by a long by a significant amount. But the government's already shifted a lot of extra cash into defence. We can see their priorities are changing, aren't they?
They are. And I think it's unfashionably, I think I'm going to say I feel very sorry for politicians, full stop. I mean, we are dealing with these enormous challenges. Demographically, ageing population, all of those things. A population that expect things, rightly, welfare. We don't want old people to be cold in the winter. We don't want kids to not have the best opportunities at school. But we're trying to decarbonise. And we're also trying to deal with the unimaginable. Someone grew up in the 90s and studying, and we thought world peace, with the re-emergence of peer rival great power warfare. Those three things coinciding, desperate for politicians, and I have sympathy for all of you.
Well, it's an unusual outburst of sympathy at the beginning of a programme like this for our elected politicians, but they do have a tough gig, most certainly, and these are nervy moments always for governments when they're about to present all of us with plans to spend billions of pounds of taxpayers' cash. Which bits of the public services will be flush? Where will there be a squeeze? And for an administration that became unpopular almost as soon as they took charge barely a year ago, the pressure is even more intense. The spending review will carve up money through till 2029. That just happens to be the year of the likely next election. And you will hear ministers emphasise a flood of money going into long-term projects, tens and tens of billions. But there is a reason why even this weekend, some cabinet ministers have still been trying to squeeze more cash out of Rachel Reeves, because in the short term, there's likely to be some pain. So let's talk then to Peter Kyle about all of this. Now, you're part of government, it's technology and science, and we know that there's going to be a lot of significant extra investment in that. But let's talk about some of the issues that you were elected on, first of all. You promised to build 1.5 million homes, one of those missions, so-called. Can you guarantee that Angela Rayner's department won't face real terms cuts?
The whole details of the spending review are going to come out on Wednesday. But look at what we already have done. The key barrier to building homes was regulation and planning problems. We've got a planning bill in Parliament at the moment. We had the regulatory reform going through in the first couple of weeks after the election. We're trying to ungum the system so that the developers can get building. And we've also put new duties on developers, not to sit on land, but to start building. So it isn't just about money. It is a whole system that we inherited was just anti-growth, it was anti-building.
But we know it's
We're tackling the whole system, and now you're going to start seeing how government's doing the money side, which is one part, but not the only part of getting houses built.
But we know it's an important part, because we know that Angela Rayner's team has been still battling the Treasury up until this weekend to get money for council homes. So I'll ask again, and you might choose not to answer, but can you guarantee that that department won't face real terms cuts?
We made a manifesto commitment. We are absolutely laser focused on delivering that. It's not just money, it's a lot of other things as well. We've got cracking right from day one of this government, which came in just 11 months ago, and then the spending side of it will be announced on Wednesday.
In terms of another one of your missions, so-called safer streets and halving violence against women and girls and increasing the number of police on the beat, we know that the Home Office has been locked in battle with the Treasury to get more money so that police numbers can be high. And police chiefs have been out there in the public domain saying you have to do this. So can you guarantee there won't be real terms cuts at the Home Office?
Well, the first thing is, in the last budget, we gave £1 billion extra to police. We are on the way to delivering 13,000 new police officers right through to community police officers so that people can have community policing back in their communities again. On the fact that the police have been writing to the Chancellor as they have, you're picking on the police that are writing. We also have letters from the universities, we have letters from doctors about the health service, we have letters from campaigners for child poverty writing to us and other aspects of challenges in Britain at the moment. Every part of our society is struggling because of the inheritance that we had as a country and as a government.
But these are your decisions now to take. You've put up taxes significantly on business in order to pay for extra investment to public service. To govern is to choose. It's a question now of where you decide to put these priorities. And you promise people there'd be more police officers. The police say there might not be enough cash, and the Home Office is still arguing over it.
And I've said that what Rachel Reeves is doing is looking at this in the round. We understand, we get it. Right across our society, our economy, our public services, we get the stresses that people are under. We understand that we are getting growth into the economy already. We're the fastest growing economy in the G7, but we know that people aren't feeling it in their pockets yet. That's why what you are already hearing about the spending review is that we are going to increase per pupil funding in schools to the highest it's ever been. And we're going to have the largest ever increase in R&D as a government in our history. We will be spending 86 billion by the end of this spending review. Now that means we're investing in the technologies of the future that are going to create the innovations and the wealth of the future, placing our economy in the forefront. We're investing in the skills that are coming through. We are building out between Oxford and Cambridge with great sort of space for new innovation, but also commercialisation. And we've done the trade deals for which the exports of the future will be relying on.
So what you were elected on were Keir Starmer's so-called missions, and two of those key missions were police on the streets and houses being built. And there are obviously deep concerns in the government departments that are tasked with doing those jobs that there won't be enough money. So can you admit today that basically the priorities have changed a bit since you've been in office? There's going to be loads more money for defence. You're always telling us the world has changed. You're putting significant extra money into the NHS. And that means, logically, there might be less cash for the missions that you promised the country you would deliver.
We will deliver on those missions. And if I'm not being clear enough, let me be clear. We have already given £1 billion extra to the police. Money is part of how we change our country for the better. And reform, modernisation, using technology, doing things in the way that people would expect our public services to be doing in the 2020s is the other part. We are delivering investment in the police. We expect the police to start embracing the change they need to do their bit for change as well. We are doing our bit. You see a Chancellor that is striving to get investment to the key parts of our country that needs it the most. That is what you've seen in the previous budget, and you've also returned the stability and the early signs of growth into our economy. You will see the priorities of this government reflected in the spending review, which sets the departmental spending into the long term. But this is a partnership. Yes, the Treasury needs to find more money for those key priorities, but the people delivering them need to do their bit as well.
In terms then of the overall, as you said, there'll be £86 billion. In fact, we think more than £100 billion extra of capital going in over the long term. And we can show our viewers a chart that was passed to me this week that will be in some of Wednesday's document. And you can see there, this is what's happened to money over the years. You can see during the coalition years, so-called austerity, the total spending of different bits of government went down. The red line, for viewers to explain, is what Labour spending is going to do, and the pale blue line is what the Conservatives would have done had they hung on in office. It's a very significant overall increase. Is that sustainable when the debt is at sky-high historic levels and so is taxation? How can you go on like that?
And that's why this story of change is so important. We're trying to do welfare reform, and we will continue to do welfare reform because we've got 3 million people as part of our legacy who are not economically active for health reasons. We need to make sure that those people get the support they need because most people do want to work, and if you do want to work, you should get the support back into work to do so and start contributing.
Why does the state need to be so much bigger than it was 20 years ago? Well,
this is state spending. What we're also doing is reforming the civil service. So actually you'll find the state becoming smaller but also smarter. That is what I think people expect. So, yes, we will invest into those key parts of our country that need it. The thing that strikes me about that chart is you saw the exponential increase in the last few years of the Tory government, but what was to show for it? There was nothing to show for it. We are doubling down on changing our state so we deliver for people, and we just absolutely make sure that we're using the latest techniques, the latest technology. Later this month, the first time ever, we'll have a gov.uk app, so every citizen can start the process of interacting with their public services via their smartphones. Well, I didn't inherit any work on that. I started that work the day I came into office. Then there will be a chatbot so people can start interacting using AI with government services so they can get more information. Then there'll be a digital wallet, and by the end of this year, a digital driving licence with all of the ID card functions that people would expect from it. This is a government that is putting power and information into people's hands. It is modernising government, and government will start to become smaller and smarter and reflect the way that people interact with travel, commerce and banking services. That's what people can expect. And we're doing it within less than a year of office.
And you're very passionate about the opportunities of technology, and we've talked to you about some of that before. And you said a few minutes ago technology and AI will drive the wealth of the country as computers become cleverer and more able to think like humans. But you know, whether it's Elton John's teasing you or not, you know there are deep fears in our mighty creative industries that by potentially allowing tech firms to use copyrighted material without permission, that you might very much harm those industries, and that could lead to economic loss and to job losses. Some people think that you are selling them out. Can we just establish, do you acknowledge right now it is illegal for anyone, tech firms or not, to be using material that has copyright without permission?
Yes, I have always done so. This debate is not about whether creative people, one side wants to protect the creative sector into the future and I don't. This debate is about how we do it and who has the best solution. Now, at the moment, I'm being criticised because I'm not accepting one amendment on a piece of legislation that doesn't change copyright at all. It's not relevant legislation. I am offering to look comprehensively at the challenges that creatives have into the future, to bring forward legislation at the right time.
Well, when?
That will
because
change.
this is a key thing.
So I have pledged that the second this data bill is through Parliament, and this hopefully will be next week, I will start working groups, workshops, analysing the consultation that I've already had that's been up and running for some time and is now closed. I will harness the fears and the opportunities that creatives have, and I will give them the rights that they have in the analogue age that are fit for the digital age.
What do you mean by that? Because there's quite a simple thing here, and you've got into a huge standoff with the House of Lords if people haven't been following this closely. There's quite a clear thing. People like Elton John, but also thousands of people who work in the creative industries, fear that they're essentially being stolen from, and that by not committing right now to saying when you're going to protect them with that new law, that you're letting tech companies away with murder, and you're doing it because you're so keen to harness the opportunities of technology. Why are they wrong?
No, they're not wrong. They are right to care about this issue. But we have the second largest creative sector in the world. We have the third largest AI market in the world. I'm not going to pick and choose between the two. This is something we should be celebrating as a country, not fearing as a country or picking from one side against the other. We can find a way forward that takes both sectors into the future because our country has these golden jewels that we need to protect. But what I want to do is to look at how remuneration works in the digital age, where in the analogue age it's just not fit for purpose. Transparency, so that people who are creating work understand how their work is being used by AI. I want to look at licensing agreements and give new powers for licensing agreements, but also I want to make sure that people who want to move away from the AI, they don't want their work consumed at all, they want to opt out of it, they also have that option too.
So you will have an opt-out, because that's one thing that the House of Lords asked for, and then at that point you were saying no to that, so you've moved on.
Actually, I always had on the table from the outset an opt-out clause, but I mistakenly said that this was my preferred option that had a more prominence than perhaps some of the creatives wanted it to have, and I've now sort of gone back to the drawing board on that, because I am listening to what people want. But look, AI has been around for a few years now. The previous government did nothing. I inherited no work on this. I've decided to grasp this difficult issue, and I will reconcile it into the future. So, whereas all the things I've just outlined that I want to offer creatives into the future, only one tiny part of that is what's up for debate in the House of Lords at the moment. I want to look comprehensively to come forward with legislation that, yes, harnesses the power of AI, but gives digital rights in the digital age for what at the moment is an analogue system for protecting rights, which isn't working because, as you said, all this stuff is being used by AI under the current law. I accept it has to change, and the only way is fundamental change, not what I'm being lobbied on, which is piecemeal change, which wouldn't do the job of protecting
I'm sure we come back to
the
this
future.
issue, because it's a very interesting dilemma for modern governments. How do you balance these things? Another one of those, and we're short on time, I'm afraid, is how you balance the fun and opportunity of being online with some of the harms, particularly for children. And you've spoken to one of the newspapers this morning and said you're looking at this idea of, you might call it an app cap, limits on kids being allowed to go on social media, a bit like a curfew. So what are you hoping to achieve, and when? I
know this is something that you and your viewers care deeply about. I've not been able to talk publicly about what the Labour approach is because we've had the legacy legislation that has to go through first. But this year we've had illegal content that needs to be taken down. But in July, age-appropriate material must be supplied by platforms, otherwise there'll be criminal sanctions against them. And in this time, I've been looking very carefully about what we do next. I want to nail down harder on safety, but I want to use that safety for a purpose, which is to understand what is a healthy online life for children in the same way we understand what health means in the physical offline world. And I'm trying to incentivise the behaviours and stop the barriers towards moving towards that healthy life. As soon as I am able to announce the measures that I'm working on, I will come here and talk to you first.
Well, we'll hold you to that promise, but can you confirm you're looking at a curfew, an app cap?
I'm looking at things that prevent healthy activity. I'm looking at some of the addictive nature of some of the apps and smartphones. I'm trying to think how we can break some of the addictive behaviour and then incentivise more of the healthy, developmental, educative and also the good communicative side of online life.
OK, Peter Carroll, thank you very much. Lots of interesting modern dilemmas in your department. It's always good to have you with us on a Sunday morning. Thank you very much indeed. Well, however Wednesday ends up looking for the government and Rachel Reeves, the Conservatives might have a tough job these days answering, given that this week the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, almost, but not quite, said sorry for Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget. And then a day later, Kemi Badenoch, the leader, almost, but not quite, said the party would leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Let's see if Chris Philp, the party's Shadow Home Secretary, is in a more definitive mood as he joins us this morning. Let's start then with the spending review and money. Your colleague, the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, expressed contrition in a big speech about Liz Truss this week. He couldn't quite say sorry. You were Chief Secretary at the time. Will you say sorry for what happened?
Well, I think Mel openly and honestly acknowledged that mistakes were made in that time. Mistakes were made. And what Mel was saying is that those mistakes will never be made again by a Conservative administration. And of course, we do see some parties today, like Reform, making extravagant promises about massive tax cuts and increases in welfare that are completely unfunded. And could cause a repeat of what happened then. But those mistakes will never again be made by a Conservative government.
Well, Chris Philp, you were the Chief Secretary to the Treasury at the time. There were 45 billion of unfunded tax cuts. Mortgage rates went soaring. There had to be emergency intervention. I'll ask you again, do you want to just say sorry for that? Maybe so you can move on.
Well, look, I think huge mistakes were made, as I've said already.
But will you say sorry? Isn't this precisely the thing that drives people bananas about politicians? You make a speech in London, your colleague makes a speech in London expressing contrition, which is a fancy way for saying we got it wrong and we're sorry. Will you say sorry to people for the Liz Truss implosion?
Well, look, Mel was pressed on this, Mel Stride, and he said mistakes were made, right? And they're not going to happen again, right? So it's very, very clear indeed. And it's relevant because we see another party, Reform, saying, you know, what Liz Truss said times 5 or times 3 on a whole bigger scale. So we've learnt from that episode, and those mistakes will never be made again.
But as a human being, if you make a mistake, you say, yeah, we messed up. Don't you just say sorry?
Look, we've been really clear. I mean, I don't know how many more times to say it. It was a mistake. They got it wrong, and those mistakes will never be made again. OK,
you are now the opposite number to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, who we understand at the department has been trying to fight the Treasury to get more money for police officers. Do you think that the Home Office police budget should be protected from cuts?
Yes, I do. I think I'm very concerned that police numbers may fall. Already this current financial year, so before this spending review, we are seeing police numbers falling. Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of the Met, is going to have to shrink the Met's workforce by 1,700, of which 1,500 will be police officers. So we're going to have less police in London, and the same story is going to play out across the country. And it looks like, from the reporting, that there are going to be problems in the 3 years after that as well, with the likelihood of police numbers under Labour going down. Whereas in government, when I was police minister this time last year, we actually hit record ever numbers of police. But Labour are putting that at risk. And what is extraordinary is that Labour have hit this country with the biggest tax rises in a generation. And yet, despite these enormous tax increases, which they lied about before the election, they claimed there were going to be no tax rises. That was a lie. Despite these huge tax rises, we are likely to see police numbers. Indeed, we are seeing right now police numbers falling.
Well, Labour would say that there wasn't a lie and that they made different decisions about tax once in office. But in terms of what you would do instead, so if you would want to protect the police budget, which you've said you would, where would you then cut from in order to keep those police numbers high?
Yeah, well, there are all kinds of areas where Labour is essentially splurging money. They're increasing, as your chart showed, they're increasing spending by a huge amount of money, partly funded by an enormous tax increase, partly by more borrowing.
So where would you cut to pay for the
police?
Where
would we do things differently? Where would we make different choices? I think we'd go further on welfare reform. So Mel Stride himself, as Welfare Secretary last year, set out plans to save £12 billion from the welfare budget. Ed Miliband is proposing to spend £37 billion on his various green plans including buying huge numbers of solar panels from China, with which he plans to cover the British countryside, while at the same time shutting down oil and gas in the North Sea. They've also given their trade union paymasters massive above-inflation pay increases, that £10,000 to train drivers, for example, without any sort of performance improvements or reform in return.
So public pay, environmental action and the welfare bill is where you would get the cash.
And by borrowing more money, as they're doing, in addition to putting taxes up, they're driving up interest repayments. So this year, we're going to be paying the country £100 billion in debt interest because they've borrowed more money. That is double the MOD budget. It's about 5 times the police budget. So because they're being so reckless, they're driving up those interest costs.
Our viewers, of course, all know very well that when you left office, taxes were at record high and borrowing was also extremely high. But I want to ask you...
Labour put those taxes up even more.
But I want to ask you about another issue that has been stirred up this week. There was a debate about this in this country about 10 years ago, actually, but it's been reignited this week by a Reform MP asking the Prime Minister whether or not he would ban the burqa. Your boss, the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, has told The Telegraph today that bosses should be able to ban employees from wearing the burqa. And she told that paper, I'm not going to talk to people who don't show their face. Is it now your party's position not to speak to people who have face coverings?
Well, she was talking specifically about her constituency surgery, I think. And it is definitely the case that employers should be allowed to decide whether their employees can be visible or not. But look, I don't think this is necessarily the biggest issue facing our country right now. There's a legitimate debate to have about the burqa. You've got obviously arguments about personal liberty and choice and freedom on one side, and arguments about causing divisions in society and the possibility of coercion on the other. That is a debate I think we as a country should be having. But as Kemi said, it's probably not the biggest issue our nation faces today.
But she said, I'm not talking to people who are not going to show me their face. Do you talk to people who aren't going to show you their face?
Well, look, I talk to people the whole time.
But do you?
I think I have in the past spoken to people, obviously, wearing a burqa. I mean, I represent a London constituency. But everybody can make their own choices. That's the point she was making. Each employer should be able to make their own choices. OK, Chris Philp, Shadow Home Secretary, thanks very much indeed for joining us this Sunday. Always good to have you with us in the studio. Remember, as ever, we want to know what you think. You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura Kay and the WhatsApp number 08000 282 161. And we'll hear from you either at the end of the show or in our newsletter every Thursday. Let's then check in with our panel. Jeremy Hunt, do you think we learn anything more about what's going to be in the spending review for Peter Kyle, or did he do the standard, manage to bat it all back despite our efforts?
I think he did what I used to do with you quite a lot, which is to say, I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait until the announcement happens in Parliament. But, you know, I think what is interesting is the way the tech sector is a big hope for this country. I've got a new book out this week in which I say that the reason we can be more optimistic about the British economy than most people are is that we have a real chance of becoming the world's next Silicon Valley. And I think, you know, what he was doing was expressing some of that confidence, but I think we need to look at the details. We're seeing these huge numbers, you know, R&D going up to 60, 70, 80 billion pounds. And I think the Treasury are masters at spinning these numbers, I'm afraid, from my own experience, and sometimes they don't quite add up to what you expect. But if it is true, I will be thrilled because, you know, we have, outside the US, best universities in the world and very, very respected. And this is a huge opportunity for the UK.
Is it realistic, though, Dan, to talk about the UK as being the next Silicon Valley? I mean, we took a close look at one of the plans for a big data centre in Northumberland that's being built, and actually the number of long-term jobs that will be created there is not tens of thousands, it's 400. I mean, we've heard for a long time politicians say things like we want to be a tech superpower, and what does it really translate to? Well,
it's hard to know what they mean by that. I think just in my own personal experience, one big difference we have to California is the difficulty of raising money. You know, the venture capital is just there's less of it in the UK, and it's harder for founders to go out there and get that kind of critical seed funding, which is so important to building those big businesses. So
Coco, what did you think of what you heard Peter Kyle when we were pressing him on police, on housing? I mean, we know there are well-publicised battles inside government over cuts to bits of the public sector.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, he talked a lot about welfare reform, and sometimes that phrase irks me. Just say what it is. It's cuts, isn't it? It's cuts to the most vulnerable who already are getting pitiful sums to survive. There's no evidence that it works. It appears to me to be an appeasement to the right-wing press, to sections of the right-wing public, and I don't think there's any evidence that it will actually help the people that really, really need it. Labour seem very scared of reform. Reform will capitalise on this, and I'm very nervous about reform. I think they will. They play in grievance politics, right? That's what they do. So if people's lives are miserable, then it's perfect for them. So improve people's lives, and I don't think anything he said to me that people's lives were going to get better, that they would get a GP appointment without it being Takeshi's Castle, that they would, not have to worry about children going into care in their schools and their children's classmates. Those things don't seem to be improved.
Well, we talk to Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform, in a few minutes' time. But, Jeremy, when it comes to welfare, I mean, Coco's just said there's no evidence that it actually works trying to bring that bill down.
Well, I think I'll probably disagree with Coco respectfully, because I think the best way to get kids out of poverty, families out of poverty, is to get them into work. And I think at the moment we are signing off about 80,000 people every year. And we're saying not just that you don't have to work, but you don't even have to look for work. And if you've got anxiety or depression, most doctors will say the most important thing is social contact. And signing people off work, I think, is the wrong way, and I think it'll lead to people being entrenched in poverty more. But my real point is that for Rachel Reeves, the challenge she has is that without welfare reform, she is going to have to raise taxes, and that's going to hurt growth, and we're going to end up in a doom loop of ever higher taxes, ever lower growth, and I think that would be a tragedy for everyone.
It's always worth reminding people, most people who claim benefits, whatever kinds of benefits they are, most people who are on benefits are working, and they claim benefits because they don't earn enough to have what the state discerns is a decent living.
And that's what Ian Duncan Smith's reforms did, and I think that's a really good thing. But my concern is the number of people who are now being signed off, being told you don't have to even look for work. That number has grown massively since the pandemic. Now, I think Rachel Reeves does want to do the right thing, but what I'm nervous about is that in the last couple of months, she and Keir Starmer seem to be losing their nerves, and the result we won't see this week, but in the autumn, when taxes, I'm afraid, inevitably end up going up.
But I can hear in my ear, metaphorically speaking, some people screaming at the telly and thinking, oh, well, hang on a minute, who was the Chancellor when a lot of this happened? And who was the Chancellor when taxes went up and when lots of people went onto welfare?
And who was the Chancellor who started to bring them down, by the way?
It was Jeremy Hunt, and you were part of governments over many, many years that saw taxes go up and saw these kinds of long-term problems be stored up.
Well, when I was Chancellor, we discussed this many times, but I did bring down taxes in an autumn statement and a budget, and you challenged me many times on saying, is this the right thing to do? And I said it was. But I just make this bigger point. There is a lot of gloom and doom at the moment, and I think actually as a country, we need to get our self-confidence back a little bit. We are still the 6th largest economy in the world. In 15 years' time, the independent experts say we will still be the 6th largest economy. And I think, what worries me is if the government loses its nerve when actually the fundamentals about the UK are actually a lot better than most of us think.
Dan, do you think that? Do you think actually we should just all cheer up?
I think we need to cheer up, but we've got a devastating, as I said right at the beginning, there's huge challenges we face. I think it's okay to be really sad and upset about, for example, increased defence spending. I think it is an abomination in many ways. It's terrible that we're going to spend money on bombs and bullets and drones, that we could invest in early years education. But the fact is that doesn't mean it isn't necessary. It's a tragedy, but it's actually not Jeremy's fault. It's not the current Labour government's fault. It is Vladimir Putin's fault. And we're going to be fighting a lot about this kind of thing over the next few years. But let's not forget, we do need to spend that money on defence, because without peace, if you want peace, you prepare for war.
But where do you then not spend money, or do you put taxes up even more? So I know from time to time you've been a Lib Dem backer. The political picture is very challenging for the government on this. Where should they cut back if all that money is going to defence?
That's obviously a question. That's why I'm very glad I'm not a politician. What an absolute nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. But what I accept that, as my wife's a prison reformer, and she would argue there are great savings to be made in criminal justice because we're spending far too much on locking people up, and which makes them more likely to commit crimes in the future, therefore more victims of crime.
Coco, how much trouble do you think the government might find themselves in with their own voters and with people on the left, or their activists as well, their party, if they proceed down these lines?
It's strange because I think Labour, in a way, have made a rod for their own back, and I get that Labour has received ongoing criticism that they're not good with money, so they need to show that they're so good with money that they're basically the Tories, which is not what anybody voted for. The poster said change. I mean, I'd call trading standards, but I think they probably had their funding cut anyway. I think that we're sort of talking around the houses a little bit. There's 50 families in the UK that have as much money as 50% of the population combined. There is money in the UK, and we're all talking about taxes. Oh, taxes aren't equal. Yeah, taxes on working people who earn average amounts. Yeah, we don't want to see their tax burden go up. But there are ultra wealthy people who are not paying enough. There are companies who are tax dodging, in my view, who are not doing enough. We can find money, and Labour's painted themselves in the corner by saying we're going to stick to these fiscal rules. Do they need to do that right now? They have some leeway. I know Rachel Reeves has tweaked it a bit and has managed to release more money than Mr Hunt did. But again, this is tinkering around the edges. It doesn't improve people's material conditions. It doesn't make them feel safer. And that is just perfect for Nigel Farage.
Jeremy, do you think it's realistic to think you could get more money from people at the top? You might not ideologically like it, but sometimes people say when you think about wealth taxes, actually they don't deliver in the end. But did you ever sit in the Treasury and think, you know what, I don't want to do it politically, but you could get loads more money out of the mega rich?
In the end, you have to look after the wealth-creating capacity of the economy. And everyone always says they like taxes to go up, but on someone else. The reality is that the number of people with the kind of money that Coco's talking about is actually very low. It doesn't raise huge amounts of money. And that huge increase in spending, the 40 billion of taxes that Rachel Reeves put up, that actually is going to be borne by ordinary families in the end, because it always works out that way. And we've got to avoid that doom loop. I want more money to go into public services, but I want to avoid the kind of huge increases in business taxes that bring down growth and mean that Rachel Reeves will have even less money to play with going forward.
Dan?
I think that I could afford to pay more tax. So I think it's going to be, I think given the unparalleled series of challenges that face us, I think we do have to be realistic about accepting that. And I think that we also need to, though, accept in terms of defence, it's a tragedy, but it is necessary. And we also, just on that as well, we've had the Strategic Defence Review. There's some really interesting stuff in there around new technology. There's also a key point there is that's working with European allies. And Britain has won its greatest wars, the wars that people will read about, they give books to their father-in-law at Christmas about, Waterloo, the Somme, D-Day, Blenheim. Those wars have all the battles and those wars have all been won by Britain working as part of giant international coalitions. We've got the EU's got a GDP multiple times that of Russia. Population, Russia 140 million, EU 450 million. We do not have to be scared of Russia as long as we're working hand in glove with our European allies.
I'm really glad to hear you say you could pay more tax. I would happily pay more tax. Tax is cool. I feel we need a rebrand of tax. Tax is a good thing. It's the only vehicle we have to stop the ultra rich taking complete advantage of us. And also, my bins only get collected every 2 weeks. I'm very sad about it. I would pay more tax. I'd like to see more people be proud of tax.
Okay.
I'm glad you're not standing for Parliament, Coco, because I don't think that line would go down very well.
Tax is coming to a leaflet near you. OK, all three of you, thanks for now. We'll be back with you towards the end of the programme. Still to come before that, a stern word from a familiar face.
Stop whining.
What is he on about? Find out in a bit later. Now then, let's talk about reform, because it's been a busy 48 hours for the party. In, out, shake it all about. The chair, Zia Youssef, quit the party on the very day they were fighting a by-election in Hamilton in Scotland on Thursday. He said it was no longer in his interest to campaign for a reform government. But last night, he changed his mind and he's back in. Confused? Well, let's see if Richard Tice, the deputy leader of the party, can clear it up. And he also has his own ideas about how the Chancellor could save some cash, and we'll come to that in a second. Mr Tice, it doesn't look very professional, does it, for your chair to be in and then out and then back in again?
Well, the reality is that, good morning, Zia Youssef has done a brilliant job in growing the party, creating huge infrastructure, over 400 branches. But it's a massive job, and as we were growing incredibly fast, essentially that job was too much for one person. So we're reorganising, and I'm delighted that Zia is staying with the party, and he's going to be focusing on our Doge unit. There is so much waste. You've been talking about how does the government find more money? well, the best thing is to stop wasting money. I'm afraid what we're discovering as we look under the bonnet of the 10 councils that we are now in control of is there's waste everywhere, and it's got to stop, and that's what Zia's going to focus on, as well as fundraising. So it's great news he's with us.
It doesn't look to the public, though, like you really know what you're doing. If you have, on one day, the guy who was the chair of the party said it's not worth his time campaigning for a reform government, and 2 days later he's back in. Doesn't it look chaotic?
No, look, we know exactly what we're doing. We're leading in the national polls. By his own admission, Zia was essentially exhausted because he'd been working 24/7 for the last 10 or 11 months voluntarily. And, you know, there's high pressure. It's a big, tough, brutal job chairing a fast-growing political party. But it's great news he's with us. On we go. And, you know, we've actually got to talk about the serious things you've been talking all morning about. You know, how can the government raise money? How can it spend it? Well, maybe we should stop wasting money voluntarily, taxpayers' cash, and that's what I am talking about when I wrote today to the Governor of the Bank of England, because the Bank of England is voluntarily paying tens of billions of pounds of taxpayers' money to enrich city institutions that it doesn't need to do on what's called the quantitative easing, the printed money. And this is a voluntary decision. Most economists, 2 former deputy governors of the Bank of England, agree with me. It doesn't have to do this. It's made a choice to do this. And I think it's the wrong choice.
And it's quite a technical argument around those interest payments. But if you had your way and the Bank of England granted your wish, how much money would you actually expect to have available to spend?
Based on the current amount of printed money, the quantitative easing money, the current base interest rate, it would be just over £25 billion every single year. And the second thing that the Bank of England should not be doing is a process of what's called quantitative tightening, where they're selling this printed money back into the market, triggering huge losses. And also, crucially, and very, very badly, that is leading to gilt yields, the cost of government debt, being increased by somewhere between 0.5 and 0.75 of 1%, which is billions pounds more. And that's accepted by people like the Financial Times, by the ECB. So these are really significant sums. And what truly worries me is these decisions are made by unelected officials with no proper scrutiny or debate in the House of Commons. And that's why I'm asking for a meeting with the Governor to put my views very firmly to them and the MPC.
But even if you did get your way on that, Mr Tice, when you look at the spending plans that Reform has put out there, at least £50 billion, for example, would be needed on one of your policies of raising the personal tax allowance to £20,000. Yes. What you've set out so far is, at best, shall we say, ambitious, and at worst, it looks like it's been done on the back of a fag packet.
Absolute nonsense. We're the only people talking about how the Bank of England should stop wasting tens of billions of pounds. We're the only people saying you should scrap net stupid zero, and that would save 20 to 30 billion pounds a year. And we're the only people saying, actually, we should stop wasting taxpayers' cash. And as we look at the 10 councils that we're now in control of, when I said you can save £5 in 100 and people said I was being over-optimistic, I have to say I think I was being a little bit cautious, a bit too conservative. There is so much waste. Surely we can all agree, stop wasting money in the back office and spend it in the front office where actually you deliver proper, efficient frontline services.
Well, there'll be raging arguments about public spending in the next few days, no doubt about that. I want to talk to you about another issue, though, because one of the reasons Zia Youssef left Reform was because of some of the racist abuse that he had been receiving. But this week, Reform has been accused of stirring up or trying to stir up some tensions itself this week. Your leader, Nigel Farage, claimed that the Muslim Scottish Labour leader, Anas Sarwar, had said that he would prioritise the Pakistani community. He did not use those words. Was Nigel Farage's claim false?
No, look, what we were talking about was that actually the Labour leader in Scotland was essentially sort of developing sectarian politics, and we called that out. And we had the Scottish by-election, and we came within 750 people of winning it. So the ridiculous claims that made by the other main politicians in Scotland about us, frankly, the voters have just ignored. And we came within a whisker of creating an absolute shock, a seismic shock. But we got 26%. It was a three-way marginal. And I think Scottish politics is changing. And we had a very simple slogan that seemed to work. Drill, Scotland, drill. The oil and gas industry generates huge prosperity for Scotland, for the United Kingdom, and we should be embracing it and enhancing it, not shutting it down, which the Labour government have essentially followed what the Tories did before with ridiculous windfall tax.
Do you not think it's important to say things that are true in politics. Mr. Farage claimed that Anas Sarwar had used words that he simply did not. He made a false claim on a sensitive issue. Was he wrong to do that?
No, look, it is sensitive, you're right. But, was it right for Mr. Sarwar to claim that Pakistanis and the South Asian community should, for example, dominate and dictate the Scottish educational agenda? Those were some of the things.
My question to you is whether or not it was right for Mr. Farage to make a false claim about words Anas Sarwar did not use.
Well, you can interpret, I think, in the overall context, it was not a false claim. It was what Mr. Sarwar was doing, which was bringing sectarian politics into Scottish politics, and that is wrong. That's not how we do things. OK,
Mr. Tice, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on a Sunday morning. Now then, remember this.
I'll be back.
He burst onto our screens as the Terminator all those years ago. But Arnold Schwarzenegger's extraordinary life has seen him play many roles. Bodybuilder, there he is. California governor and Green campaigner. And now 77. He's lost none of his lust for life, with plenty still to look forward to.
Oh, man. The most important thing is...
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That is the most important thing.
Do you know already when you're going to have that?
No. it's always ready.
Always one on standby. Well, his passion for the environment doesn't mean that he has much patience for some in the environmental movement, who he told me need to stop whining about President Trump. I asked him what he meant.
I've noticed that people always said to me, well, Arnold, I mean, what is the point of fighting the environmental issue here and to reduce pollution, with Trump in the White House and with the federal government having no interest in not believing in climate change? And I tell them, I said, hey, stop whining. What do? I said, we all have a responsibility. What do you think, the action comes only for the whole world out of Washington, the White House? No. I said, most of the action is happening on a local level and on a state level. I mean, I was governor of California and I was aiming for a huge environmental kind of explosion of some sort, reducing greenhouse gases. And the federal government came to me and says, you can't do that. You can't regulate your own air. We don't believe in that. So I didn't whine. I said, wait a minute. Isn't there an old saying by Nietzsche, for every attack there is a defense? I said, let me find the defense. So we sued the federal government. That was our defense.
There has, though, been a big change in the world, a big change in America's political direction. America's coming out of the Paris Treaty, the important climate accords. Since Donald Trump's been in, he's cancelled many, many different environmental initiatives. So maybe it's not whining to pose questions about the fact this is harder. It is more difficult when you have an administration in DC that doesn't want to follow this agenda. Do you admit that?
Yeah, but first of all, it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of things that we can do. Let's worry about what we can do rather than what we can't do. Plus, let's be honest, with the Paris Agreement, that's all facade, right? Because if America goes in or out, it makes no difference because 70% of the countries did not abide by their promises anyway.
So people should just ignore Donald Trump then?
I wouldn't say ignore it. I think you can be aware of it. You have to be aware of your obstacles, but you should not go and use them as an excuse, is my point. You got to go all out. Do I have a vision? Imagine that when I was 15 years old, my vision was to go to America and to be a bodybuilding champion and to get into acting and to do big movies, Hollywood movies. What do you think the obstacles there were? Endless amount of obstacles. And it was very difficult. It was a grind. So did I surrender? Did I go and whine? No.
Do you think activists sometimes whine?
Everyone has a different personality. So in general, you will find people that are whiners. They get up in the morning and they whine. Oh my God. My back. Oh God. Oh, it's my knee. Darling, can you give me the ice? My knee. They whine from here to eternity rather than just shut up and just get to work.
There seems to be a growing skepticism, not that climate change isn't real, but to people having to do something about it. There seems to be less appetite for that.
I don't blame them. Why don't they just say what it is? It's like terminating pollution. That's what we're talking about. We got to communicate the right way. Every time you do a movie, they get together with a publicist and with marketing people, with geniuses, and they say, how do we promote this movie? Should we promote this as a love story? Should we promote this as a action movie or futuristic movie or adventure movie or this, and that? They are trying to identify it. No one in the environmental community has ever sat down and said, how do we sell this? Because if they would, they wouldn't be using climate change, because that's.
But you have politicians, though. Even your friend Sir Tony Blair here this morning, he said that people in rich countries don't want to make financial sacrifices to try to do this anymore. Do you think there is really still public appetite to get on with this?
Well, first of all, Tony Blair is right. There is not much appetite, but it doesn't mean that we should not inspire people. It's not easy because people still have the fear that when you go and do something environmentally friendly, that they will cost you money and they will hurt the economy. But we in California, we can tell the people around the world, we in California have proven the opposite. We have the #1 and the strictest environmental laws in America. And we are also at the same time #1 economically.
So what would you say then to politicians in Europe or anywhere who are telling the public that it's too expensive, it's too difficult, and maybe it's a load of old rubbish?
Everything you say are excuses. People try to find excuses not to do it. But also, if the people are being told it is about pollution, then they will go and demand from the politicians action. We have shown ads in California on television that talked about sea levels rising. They talked about the polar bears. They talked about the ice melting and all this stuff. Nothing moved. But as soon as we showed a TV spot of a child being on an inhaler, and then wiping out, passing away, people looked at this and said, oh my God. And then it said, that's what we do to our children because of pollution.
You are a proud migrant to America. You are one of the most stunning success stories of the American dream. You go there with a big dream and a big ambition. Mm-hmm. Do you feel the American dream is still alive, given what's happening in the country?
Me? Oh, I see it firsthand all the time. I mean, I could go right now today as a 15 or as a 20-year-old boy over to America and make it exactly the same way, maybe even easier. America is the land of opportunity, no matter what. It doesn't matter who is president.
I want to ask you about a different success, your son's success, if I may. People will now have seen Patrick in hugely successful series, The White Lotus.
I mean, I bet I could even connect with you on a spiritual level since that's so important to you.
Is he anything like the character? And what's it like for you seeing him have that success?
Well, it was, as I said to Patrick, it was really so amazing to watch his performance because I almost didn't recognize him.
Really?
So, I mean, there's certain kind of things that he does that I'm aware of because, he's my son. And I always see it facially, when he gets nervous, there's certain things and certain habits, certain looks and stuff. But then there were so many things that I've never seen before. And I said to myself, where did this come from? It was wild to watch that. And I was so proud of him that he has become such an extraordinary actor.
You're being very complimentary about him. He recently said you were having a midlife crisis.
Why not? I mean, wouldn't you have a midlife crisis when 40 years ago you say, I'll be back, and then 40 years later you say, ow, my back.
You're still doing an awful lot of new things, though. Your whole environmental work, you're still acting, still hugely successful series and documentaries, and also now a song.
I'll be back. My life has been fantastic. I wouldn't change my life with anyone. So I'm doing so many things. I'm so excited about all the stuff that I'm doing, So I'm very fortunate.
Gardner, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to speak to you again. Thank you very much.
Wonderful to see you again, and we do it again. There's one sequel after the next.
And there's a longer version of our conversation with Arnold Schwarzenegger on the iPlayer for you. Let's then pick up, Dan, on that point he's making about public appetite to deal with climate change, which does seem to have faded. And he said, I don't blame people for not wanting to be enthusiastic about it at a time like this. Do you think, is that a concern to you that there's less enthusiasm?
Yeah, it is a concern, but this is one of those examples where governments have to lead. And there are lots of... We are just 4 people here sitting with microplastics in our bodies and our brains. This is something that, unfortunately, the public may think one thing or another about, but they don't have a choice. It's a monumental catastrophe hitting the pipeline. We're going to spend some money now, or we're going to spend a lot of money later on if we're even able to. And we have to win that debate. I think there's an interesting thing about this story. Is we're always made to feel like it's somehow our fault. We're polluting. Actually, this needs gigantic intergovernmental action. It's a top-down problem. It's around plastics and it's around decarbonization, it's oceans. I can't help the fact that we're destroying our seabed, dredging things. We put too much pressure on the consumer. Sometimes this is something the government just has to go with and lead.
But, Jeremy, when you were in government, actually, the Conservatives gave up or rolled back some of the speed of the efforts that you had to combat climate change. Was that a mistake?
A little, but
was a bit of a mistake.
Well, we only made a very small watering down. By the end of our time in office, we had decarbonised by more than any other major economy. But wasn't Arnie brilliant? I mean, you know, stop whining, terminate pollution. I think he wins more fans for doing something on climate change.
But that's quite a deft avoiding of something interesting that you quite said. You said it was a little bit of a mistake to slow down some of the...
No, I said we watered down the targets a little, but we still passed the law that committed us to getting to a net zero economy by 2050 and decarbonise, as I say, by more than anyone else. And I think, I mean, you know, there's another example of actually where the UK has led the way internationally. It's something I talk about in my book a lot, and I think it's an example of where we can be a force for good in the world. I hope we don't, you know, put that aside.
But then the party that is ahead in the polls right now, Reform, we were just speaking to Richard Tice, and he said net stupid zero. I mean, that was his phrase. Coco, what did you think when you heard that?
I mean, just going back to the Arnie interview, I was delighted to see him pull out a cigar because I thought, well, this man is scared of death less than me. You know, because we have really serious environmental problems that is killing us. It's harming our workforce. We have a growth agenda. We've got loads of people off sick. The environment is part of the nation's growth and the nation's well-being. I think Richard Tice is, I mean, to be honest, I just think all of Reform will just say anything to appeal to people's worst instincts. I mean, Nigel Farage was talking about being anti-abortion last week. So, I mean, they all say anything. I don't take anything that they say as being necessarily like smart and worth following. But yeah, no, I think the environmental push is crucial. We need it, and it suits every part of our agenda.
And just briefly, does it concern you the kind of language and things that Reform are saying about Anna Sarwar and claiming that actually that Labour has been introducing sectarian politics into Scotland, which, if you know much about Scottish politics, sectarianism has been a feature for a very long time, but that's a whole other story. But are you concerned to hear how they're talking about that?
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? Because you kept asking the question, which is, but it wasn't true. But it wasn't true. They don't care about truth. Truth doesn't matter. We live in the post-truth age. And I feel frustrated coming on here to sort of point out, being like, well, it's not right what they say. You know, we're in a battle of emotions and a battle of storytelling. Can the Labour Party tell a better story about a multicultural Britain, about a Britain where young people can get on and not be afraid that they can't get a job, that their student debt is too high? What is the story that progressives need to tell?
OK, well, big pressure on Rachel Reeves to come up with a convincing story this week. I hope you weren't too frustrated being with us here this morning. Coco, Dan and Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our guests, of course, and most of all, thank you to you for spending your Sunday with us. Arnold Schwarzenegger told everyone to stop whining about Trump. But this time next week, who will be bemoaning the Chancellor or cheering her after her big day on Wednesday? We expect she'll be with us next Sunday, so you can send questions in for her too. Do head to iPlayer to see the full conversation with Arnold. And I'll be on Sunday's newscast later on BBC Sounds. And of course, I'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.